Welcome everyone to this episode of the Fantasy Knuckleballers show. In this episode we will be talking Champ or Chump. This episode is where we will tackle the tough player-specific questions that all of us have. This first one here is on Randy Arozarena.
Yeah, so for the first one here, let's talk about Randy Arozarena. So right now his average draft position is 53. He's gone as high as 23, as low as 76. But out in the fantasy community, when looking on different message boards and seeing what people are doing, there's a lot of people that have moved him up into their top 10. This segment is more geared towards that kind of scenario. Like, hey, here's a guy who maybe could be top 10, maybe could be as low as 25. So what do we do with those guys? So Aaron, why don't you give us some reasons why he should be in the top 10, and then Rich, why don't you outline, why don't you argue against that?
Aaron, you're going down.
I don't know about that one. I got a pretty safe argument here. So Arozarena was last year's playoff darling. If you were in a different planet last year while not following baseball, he was playoff MVP. I know the Dodgers won, but Arozarena was the man. He had the best statistical performance of any player in playoff history. And that says a lot because there's been a lot of postseason players, a lot of great performances, and he was the best statistically. And if I stop there, you could probably make a pretty good point. Maybe it was just a fluke. But here's why Arozarena is a legitimate top 10, maybe even a first or second round pick, potentially, is because he always hit every level of baseball he's been in. He's performed well. He's hit for average. He had a really high on base percentage. He's had over a 400 on base percentage in every level of competition he's played in over the last 3 years. He has power. He has speed. He's the full package. He is 25, which is a little bit older than what I would like a hidden gem to come out with, but he's at the point where his career are starting to peak, and you want to get in now because not a lot of people know about him, even though he was postseason darling. Not a lot of people pay attention to the postseason because when they start prepping for this year, they look at last year's stats. And even though he had really good stats last year in only 23 games, they won't really consider him a lot because it was very shortened. But like I said, if you pay attention and you listen to this podcast and listen to me, you'll understand that he's a potential MVP down the road.
Rich, what are your arguments against that? Why should we not consider him?
Okay, I like Randy Arozarena, but let me tell you who's going in the top 10 in outfield. It's a who's who: Ronald Acuna, Mookie Betts, Juan Soto, Mike Trout, Christian Yelich, Cody Bellinger, Bryce Harper, Kyle Tucker. If you want to go young, you got Lewis Robert. You got if you want speed, you got Whit Merrifield. You got Starling Marte. Those are your top 10. And there's a couple other guys. You got Marcell Ozuna. Those are your top 10 outfielders. And so you're saying that he belongs in that group. My reasoning is he had a great postseason, the best postseason ever. I think if you look at last year, 2020, that's the most home runs he's ever hit in his career. If you look at his minor league stats in 2018, he hit 12 home runs. In 2019, I think he totaled 16. When you look at Arozarena, he's had very good stats in the minor league, but not great stats. He never really rose up, made the top 100 as far as prospects. He was always a good, solid prospect, but not great. He was always a little older for his age. Now, I do believe he came from Cuba, so he got a late start. But his max on stolen bases is 26. That was in 2018. In 2019, he had 17. I think Arozarena is really, really good. And it's hard for me to bump him down to 20 because I do think he's a guy that's gonna hit 20 home runs and gonna steal probably 15 bags. I'm just not sure that I buy into him being that elite guy. He's never had most of his minor leagues, with the exception of 2019, his batting average was 270, 280. It's hard for me to put him over, say, Eloy Jimenez, who's 24, a little bit younger, and already has a track record of in 108 games. In 2018, he had 22 home runs or 45 when you combine his AA and double and AAA. In 2019, he had 31 in 122 games. It's hard to beat that kind of elite power. If you want speed, you got Whit Merrifield doing 45 on pace last year for do over 30 and be a 15-30 guy. I love Randy Arozarena. I think he had a great year. I'm just not ready to put him in that top 10. I'm going to move him back a little bit.
So here's my one follow-up to that. I think most drafts he will probably go around 18 or 20. I'm saying at the end of this year, end of 2021, he will be a top 10 fantasy outfielder.
Yeah, so Aaron, I agree with you about the consistency throughout the minor leaguers. It's there. I actually expect his stolen bases to increase based on his history this year. But like Rich says, they're consistent, but they're not super. And if you look at the stats from the postseason last year, he played way above, his statistical averages. So the question is there, how much are we going to get this year? So yeah, I think I have him outside the top 10 as well.
Benefits for all those who are believing Randy Arozarena, like having us be able to take him in the top 10 and he'll finish in the top 10 will be a benefit to all of us.
Yeah. So for anybody out there listening, if you guys have any comments, shoot us an email, give us a shout on Twitter. Let us know your thoughts. If you have any questions, reach out and we'll try to address those in the next podcast.
If you have any other players that you want us to debate or even just questions you want us to answer, you can go to our website or send us an email. Either one's fine. You might be a question or a debate for a future episode. The next one is Kris Bryant. He's a former MVP, but over the last few years, he's been kind of middle of the road third baseman. So I don't have a dog in this fight. Really interested in learning what the two of you guys have to say about Kris Bryant.
Yeah, so I'll start off, and I'm just not on board, man. The 2015 season, he gave everybody so much hope. We thought he was going to be in the conversation of fantasy MVP for many years to come, and that just hasn't happened. It doesn't help that the Cubs seem to be in a non-win mode, and who knows what else they're going to do with their roster. Good news for him is they've re-signed some of the hitters around the lineup, so the hitting lineup remains pretty solid. But when you look at his numbers, I just don't see any signs of life there. You look at his hard hit percentage in 2015, you're talking 43%. And that has decreased every year. Last year was down to just over 30%. That's good for 328th among all hitters. The barrel percentage among
he was hurt last year, bad shoulder.
I know, but you look at 2019, it was only 34%. You look at his barrel percentage among batted ball events, it's way down there. His average exit velocity is way down there. If you look at these underlying stats, I just don't see any sign of him making a comeback or being worth that high of a pick.
Okay, let me rebut that. Okay, I agree. 2015, 2016, he was looking like he was Hall of Fame. He's fallen a little bit. He's always been a launch ankle guy more than a high exit velo guy. But if you look just over 2017, 2018, 2019, and only averaging 133 games because he missed 60 games. He's been 24 home runs, about 80 runs, 80 RBIs, 4 stolen bases, 284 batting average. When I look at him and I look at his 2019, he had 31 bombs, had 108 runs, 282 batting average. I mean, I'm taking that as my third baseman that's going pick 130. And if you look at NFBC, they have him 16th. I think Fantrax, it has him 12th third base off the board. I'm good with him being my 12th third baseman off the board. He was hurt last year. He's a career 280 hitter. He's a career 380 on base percentage and a 508 slugging. He can play on my team. I think he's not a 40 home run guy, but he's a 25 30.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. The point is I'm not saying he's not a 12 guy. I mean, the point is he's not a top 10 guy. I mean, that's the argument.
Well,
here's
the reason I think he is. I mean, they have people like Jan Moncada going ahead of him. Do you think Moncada's batting average is gonna be above 235 to where he can outperform Bryant? I mean, they got Kevin Biggio with third base eligibility, Jeff McNeil going 88. I don't see either one of those players being better than Bryant. I mean, you can even throw Torres going 88. I mean, when I can take Kris Bryant at 130.
Yeah, for me, it's just I just don't see the promise there. You know, hopefully for him, I'm wrong. You know, I think everybody is kind of rooting for him to make a comeback, but as at this point, you know, I have several guys ahead of him, and there's no way I'm putting him in my top 10.
But I think you have to give him a pass on 2020. I mean, if you're giving other people's a pass, COVID affected everybody. He was hurt. He didn't play a lot of games. I throw that season out. He's consistently been a high batting average guy and solid power.
You know, one thing neither one of you mentioned is he has outfield eligibility as well. It does boost the overall rankings, so having roster flexibility is really important. But I guess if I was deciding between whether or not top 10 or not, it would all break down to if he gets traded. If he gets traded to Atlanta or Washington, then yeah, I will probably go with you, Rich, and think he's top 10. If he stays in Chicago, I think he drops.
Well,
yeah, how many at-bats did he have last year in the outfield? I'm looking for the data right now.
I think he lost his eligibility last year for outfield.
Yeah, I don't.
2019, but he could.
Yeah, he only had 3 games last year, Aaron. In most leagues, that's not gonna validate eligibility. In most leagues, it's 5 minimum. He only had 3 at-bats last year, so.
It all depends on your league because different leagues are taking 2020 stats differently. That's definitely something that users should, listeners should look at their league and see whether or not he has outfield eligibility or not.
Yeah, and you guys know I'm a big multi-position eligibility guy. Those guys are always going to get a bump in my book. But it's safe to say that in most leagues this year he's not going to be outfield eligible. Unless they throw him in the outfield for a few games, and barring his injuries, I'd say that's even less likely.
So the next one here is Adalberto Mondesi. His average ADP is 40. Does he deserve better?
Can I just introduce him a little bit because I know
sure,
y'all
absolutely.
Sides. You know, when I look at Mondesi, he has put up great numbers. I mean, when you look at his stolen bases, he might be the best base stealer in baseball. But one of the things that scares me, just as an introduction of why I probably lean staying away from him, is if you look at his stats, he has cold spells, bad cold spells. And if you're one of those guys that gets nervous about players, I think he went in to this year at the 7-week mark with like 3 weeks left, batting like 190. And then he put all his stats together in 3 weeks. It's hard sometimes not to drop those players when they're going through a cold streak and just sticking with them. That's my only take on Adalberto Mondesi. What do you think, Aaron?
Mondesi is one of, I'll call my guys. I love this guy. I love what he can do for you and your team. I mentioned some stats earlier in the segment about stolen bases, and I'll go back to these stats. 2019, 2,380 stolen bases that entire year. At home runs, there were 6,776 home runs. He's a guy that over the last 3 years he's the top stolen base guy over the last 3 years. He's been in the top 3 every single one of those years. If you take his 43 stolen bases in 2019, that's 1.8% of the total stolen bases or done in baseball was done by Mondesi that year. If you would take the top home run guy in 2019, which was Pete Alonso, he had 53 home runs. That portion of the home run total for the league is 0.78. The top home run guy will only get you 0.8% of the total home runs hit, whereas the top stolen base guy will get you 1.8% of the whole. That's a difference of 2.5%. So there's a big difference between getting the top stolen base guy and the top home run guy. Granted, there's other ins and outs of that. Home runs will get you a couple other categories. So there's more than just stolen bases here.
Yeah, so unfortunately, if you're talking about rotisserie, which I think that's going to be the main focus of our show here, you have to account for 5 categories, not 1. There's no question Mondesi is going to lead the league in stolen bases. I think that's pretty much going to be a given. Villar is probably the only one who can even compete there. With me, I just can't bank on a guy a 1 category wonder. Not that he's horrible in the other categories. When you take a dive into his numbers, he's to get those stolen bases, he's got to be on base. Career on base percentage is around 300, which is well below the league average. He only hits for a league average, batting average. He just strikes out too much. He swings strike rate second highest in the league. Horrible contact rate. You're talking about a guy who, his ground ball rate has shot through the roof in the last 2 years. I just don't see enough there to validate moving him up based on 1 category. Again, we've talked about each draft being different. Now, if you're in a draft and you need a shortstop, there's 8 off the board, and you're desperate for stolen bases, then you can make that argument. But for me, standard ranking, I don't have him in my top 10 for the reasons that I just outlined. There's just too many questions around the rest of his game to move him up that high just based on 1 category.
You were referring to top 10 of the shortstop, right?
Yes.
A couple other things before I want to mention about him in particular. Yeah, he does have a 300 on-base percentage, which I would love to have a little bit higher on-base percentage for a stolen base guy. But the one thing that not very many people realize, that if you look at a lot of the teams that won last year around the industry, all of those teams had 1 player in common, and this 1 player was Mondesi. He was the key linchpin to a lot of these championships. Go back to any of your mixed league champions, and I'll guarantee you the player who won it or came in second had Mondesi on their team. So that's a little side note. What were you going to say, Rich?
Yeah, that's a good note. But what ADP was Mondesi last year? I'm guessing it was pretty late. And he was a great pickup if you're drafting, say, pick 150. I think if you look at his last 3 years, the most games he's played is 102 in 2019. I mean, but to your point, I mean, if he gets 500 at bats, he's going to get 50 steals. Steamer has him projected for 149 games, 21 home runs, 84 runs, 79 RBIs, 54 steals. If he does that, Aaron, you're golden. But if he maybe only gets 400 at bats, like Justin said, 9 home runs and 60 runs and maybe 40 RBI, I'm kind of with Justin on this.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Rich. I mean, his career high plate appearances is 443. So he's a player that's always had something going on injury wise. That's always in question too. If you pick a guy, if you move a guy, you say you have him as your shortstop, strictly for stolen bases, and you pick him, and then he ends up playing, only getting 300 at bats, and then you're in a really bad spot.
I agree with that.
Aaron. So let's just say this how it is. Aaron, you're the chump. Justin, you're the champ. That's how we should.
I don't know about that, but
not whoever wins. Who wins the argument?
What we should do is keep track of all of these and reveal the winner at the end of the year.
Yeah, I like that. Listeners, let us know your thoughts too. Don't be shy. If you want us to discuss it further, if you have anybody else you want us to talk about, let us know.
Yeah, by all means, put down in the comments else you want to talk about, and we'll discuss it. And like I said, we'll have to put together some sort of trophy year to year for the three of us and see who is right about the majority of these. All right, there's our first three for the year.